He has resigned for the troubled world to see. He showed the principles of free democracy. The greatest man in Europe history is the truth. He was a hero in the Vol.II. youth. Eisenhower praised him for his great advice. His wisdom and courage that was always nice. He was the greatest prime minister, a genius and a pal of America. Ministers may reign, but we'll never find a brain like Winston Churchill again. Hitler and Mussolini really done a lot. Churchill planned how to get them in the pot. He made an offer as the primer when he sat. Blood, toil, tears, sweat, how you look at that. He was provoked, so he did defend. And Hitler and his gang had a bitter end. He was the bravest prime minister, a genius and a pal of America. Ministers may reign, but we'll never find a brain like Winston Churchill again. His father was a lord, he was the eldest son. That's why many great things he have done. Was educated at Sanharu, a journalist. King, the world will tell you so. One man means so much to everyone. We missed his leadership, now he's gone. He was the greatest prime minister, a genius and a pal of America. So ministers may reign, but we'll never find a brain like Winston Churchill again.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast is to get into the review of the second volume of Winston Churchill's Second World War series. This is a 5-volume piece altogether, and we're looking at Volume 2 entitled Their Finest Hour. And as some of you know, I have been plowing along this year looking at all of the books in the library concerning the Holocaust. And hey, there I am. I've been seduced by Sir Winston and his prose, and have detoured from the main study into, I think, a mutually enriching study when I return to the Holocaust theme. This will be great background. I'm not new to reading about Churchill. I did so somewhat consistently during my college training, and read various biographies and speeches and compilations by the man. And so it's almost like coming across an old friend, although I have rather negative opinions about Churchill as a statesman and a military leader. I think he's one of the most grotesque war criminals in human history. Nevertheless, that bias does not affect my appraisal of his writing style. As I've told a number of you watching, I feel it's a shame the man did not stay as a writer and as a painter. We don't think of Winston Churchill as an artist on the easel, but so he was. By the way, the photograph here is somewhat overexposed. He is not giving you the middle finger here. He's actually making the peace sign. If you can make that out there. Something interesting too is whilst the foreground is very sharp, though overexposed, you can see the background. This guy looks like a Siamese twin back here. Some dude got bled into the other. It's not the same guy. You can see one has a mustache, one doesn't. But anyway. So we are looking at this second volume, Their Finest Hour, this title or subtitle from the series of Volume 2, obviously comes from one of, if not the most famous speech that Churchill gave, a man who was very handy with words altogether, and that is the Finest Hour speech given during the Battle of France. We're going to enjoy a few paragraphs from that before we're through. Churchill boasts in the first volume that even prior to the Second World War, which was a new title, by the way, he publishes all of this series in the mid to late 1940s. And that title, The Second World War, was only one of a number of titles for the conflict that were vying for historiographical cred, let's say. Others were the War for Democracy. The Soviets called it, as they still do in the Russian Federation, the Great Patriotic War, ultimately. Maybe because of Churchill's choice, the Second World War won out in terms of at least English historiography, and I believe that term is used in other languages as well. The series, based off of volumes 1 and 2, I imagine this observation will prevail, is very carefully plotted out. Volume 1 was broken into 2 parts, Volume 2, and I should think the rest will be broken up in a similar fashion. So Volume 1 began, I believe, what Churchill calls his wilderness years. He's out of office for much of the 1930s, painting in the south of France, writing books on Marlborough and who was yes, Louis XIV was of course the French monarch at the time of the British general tromping around, and so the 1930s are taken up with those avocations, as Churchill is noticing, and if he's to be believed, warning people about the growing menace of National Socialism. That's part 1 of Volume 1. Part 2 of Volume 1 is what he calls the Twilight War, where Britain is in a state of war with Germany, and there are different basically everyone's just sharpening their knives for the coming conflict, although there are actual military engagements on sea, different preparations that are being laid. Very interesting. I've noticed this, of course, as you have, that treating a subject much more deeply than we ever got in school, or even in a single monograph, it's fascinating the details that come up, and that is the benefit of this whole series, is that inside baseball, I mean, quite truly, this is a remarkable document that we have from one of the major participants in this conflict. Of course, it's going to be biased. If you wrote a monograph, and if you were of any standing in a historical conflict, you can be forgiven for being a bit biased about yourself as well. We're not going to hold it against Churchill, whatever we might hold against the man otherwise, but of course he's going to have an interest in presenting his side of things. Nothing wrong with that. One of the great benefits of this whole series, of course, are the telegrams and telegraphs even and speeches that are contained in an appendix, just like in Volume 1. Now, Volume 2 is broken up into 2 halves, as I say. The first half is the Battle of France. The second half is the Battle of Britain. I feel confident that when I crack open Volume 3, it's going to begin, as he teased, with the Battle of the Atlantic. So we're going to look at the U-boats and all of this coming up. But Volume 2 is what we're focused on here. Fascinating. I knew very little about the so-called Battle of France, that is to say, the German conquest of France, beyond it being a footnote. If you read just general monographs of the war, Germany conquers France, and then you're moving on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it really was insightful to get hundreds and hundreds of pages of analysis of what was going on between the British government and then the French government, and then into Vichy, and then the Free French with de Gaulle. All of that was just really, really fascinating. Some parts in particular that I was completely unaware of and will not be forgetting soon was the efforts uh, of the French to hold off the Germans. I know it's a joke, the stamina of the French in battle. We can have all sorts of anti-Gallic jokes about the French surrender monkeys, as we in America called them, in fact, during the disgraceful Second Iraq War. The French, in retrospect, very much to their credit, refused to support that adventure. But in any case, those early days of this century were full of anti-French jokes on that account. Why are there trees on the Champs-Élysées in Paris? Well, to give the Germans shade as they march in. And prior to reading Their Finest Hour, that was, with a grain of salt, I understood it was an exaggeration, but I did not realize, in fact, how hard the French army had fought to keep the Germans out of France, and it wasn't a matter of them rolling over. Now, eventually, Vichy French, as they'll be called, because they'll set up in that city in the south, will go belly up, and you can tell Churchill is disgusted at this. Before we get to the Vichy situation and that of de Gaulle, it's worth mentioning. Really, I will take this away. I'll mention a few other memorable points, but besides the stamina, actually, of the French army holding back the German onslaught, something else that really was interesting was the offer that the British government made to the French government to merge, for the duration of the war, to merge the governments of both countries into a single entity, and therefore allowing the full might of Britain to come behind France in a way that it was not going to happen otherwise. And it was also going to allow France to be propped up directly. Not they would be. You can read it in your own libraries. I'm sure you have a copy of this, or you can get it online. It really, I mean, you show up for the prose, I suppose, of Churchill, but this was something I was completely unaware of. That the British government had offered to merge and to take on the full responsibility of defending France from National Socialist, the so-called Nazi Germany. That is a remarkable, shall we say, going out on a limb, and a remarkable condensation, shall we say, to the French in their hour of tremendous peril. And this does take place over several weeks as the fighting goes on. So it's not a matter of the French going belly up immediately. Eventually, the National Assembly of France will, and that will become Vichy. And once it becomes clear that this is the direction of things, and the French government has relocated and is putting out feelers to the Germans for a truce, the next and third thing that I will take away from part one of this book is the scuttling of the French fleet. And so Britain was a bit miffed. And again, you can see the disgust, you can read the disgust of Churchill when he's in a very restrained way, I should say. And I think that was very much of the generation that Churchill was trained as a writer from. I mean, he's very restrained in his criticism, as he is with is it Vikling Quisling, the Norwegian prime minister who cuts a deal with the Nazis. You can tell Churchill has a very low opinion, whether it was of the Norwegian government or of the French government, in making a deal with the Germans. But it's not nearly as on the nose as perhaps our style is nowadays. And for that, it is a much more potent critique, I find, as opposed to if he was just cussing them out and calling them yellow bellies and so forth. The criticism is there, the disgust is there in the text, but it's very restrained, and for that you understand the power of the sentiment all the more. In any case, yes, the third part that I will take away from the Battle of France section is the the scuttling of the French fleet and the discussions about that, and the fact that the British in no way, shape, or form, once the French have decided to cut a deal with the Germans, are they going to allow the French fleet to now become the German fleet, right? Because once Germany conquers France, all of the assets, militarily and otherwise, of France now become German booty, and that means the French fleet is now going to be an enemy fleet to the British. The British, and Churchill has insisted upon this, and I think he does a lot, even in the moment, to double down on this decision, this mythology that Britain will carry on alone. Getting back to volume 1 of this series and getting back to larger British geopolitics, as Churchill points out, for 400 years, it has been the policy of the Foreign Office to always support the weakest elements of the continent against the strongest. This goes back even to the Spanish and the Portuguese, and all the time since then with the French, and indeed the Germans in their time. It is just a policy of the British. It's not personal, shall we say, to do this. And so in this time, 1940, we're looking at the spring of 1940, the German attack in June of 1940. It comes at a time where now Britain is, the scale, so to speak, are completely against British objectives on the continent. The Germans have effectively conquered the continent. The only outstanding members would be the Spanish, and I believe the Portuguese were neutrals. The Irish are neutrals, which is something that Churchill also has a lot of restrained criticism for, especially when we get to the Battle of Britain section. And I should think this will be much more prominent in the next volume when we look at the Battle of the Atlantic, because there were various ports that Eamon de Valera had managed to finagle from the British. After all, that was the promise of the treaty. It was a stepping stone to getting the British completely out of Ireland. That's a whole other discussion. But nevertheless, even in this volume 2, the Battle of France, the Battle of Britain, the Irish situation, as well as the Spanish, and I believe the Portuguese, they are neutrals. Otherwise, the Germans have either wooed people like the Italians and other people in South Central Europe, and conquered the rest. So we can also, at this hour, put the Soviets in the German camp as well as their allies, which we'll talk about. But that does leave, in terms of opposition, the Americans are neutral at this point, and so that leaves Britain and its colonies as the only ones to carry on the fight against the Germans. So it is an example of stick-to-itiveness, to use an old, somewhat forgotten word. Stick-to-itiveness. Try staying that fast. I can't even say it slow. But anyway, that's the situation. So this is the gravest moment. And Churchill, at this point, and we have plenty of telegrams to illustrate this, Churchill is also pointing out the strengths that Britain has in this hour of peril. We're not even talking about the Battle of Britain yet, but one of which, moving now to part 2, and the German possible invasion, so-called Operation Sea Lion. Part of that is one of the strengths of Britain, and this is something Churchill knows from the jump. No matter how devastating the Luftwaffe's attack will become, Churchill knows that the Germans are not in a position to attack the island. They do not have the ability to move the German army across the English Channel. The Germans, and this will be the case throughout the war, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, the Germans in the Second World War are actually quite similar to the French during the Napoleonic Wars, meaning they have the German high command, just like the French high command in those respective conflicts, have a mastery of infantry warfare and all that pertains to that, including air warfare, artillery, tanks, and so forth. You can put that in the French situation with cavalry and whatnot. But whether it's the German high command in the 20th century or the French high command in the early 19th century, they both have, yes, a handle, a lockdown on infantry warfare on land, but they both are incompetent when it comes to naval warfare. And we know how that went with Napoleon, places like Trafalgar, and we know with Operation Sea Lion that the Germans simply do not have the resources to mount an attack on Britain. And so what happens, especially once the English Channel is more provisioned with mines and things like that by the British, what happens then is an attempt to break the spirit of the British and to turn them against the war. The Germans and the racial policy of the Nazi Party in particular saw, I think with some sense, that the English were a branch civilization of Germany, and so they had a very different psychology towards them to begin with. The British were kissing cousins of the Germans, and the idea of the Battle of Britain, the air war, is also, to break the resistance of the British government, and then, our misguided, I'm speaking as if I were German, right? Our misguided British cousins will come around, they'll put pressure on their government. Maybe the communistic elements in Britain will act, as Churchill believes, like the communistic elements in France did, and sap the morale of British resistance, just like they had sapped the morale of French resistance. Churchill very much believes that it was the communist agitators in France that led to the lack of spirit, ultimately, in the French government. And perhaps the Germans are going to try, as it would seem, they're going to try to bank on that, to break the morale of the British, and they'll put pressure on their government to kiss and make up with the Germans, and now Britain will perhaps have a puppet government like Norway or France would have. That's kind of the plan B. Once the Germans realize they're not going to be able to conquer in any serious way, there's not going to be a cross-channel invasion. The Germans simply do not have the landing crafts and the special technology that would need. Air war, they don't have the airplanes it's not feasible. But you can bluff, right? You can bluff. And you can bomb the hell out of England in the meantime. And so Churchill, at this point, as we're looking at the second half of the story in the volume here, Churchill has a lot of personal anecdotes about near misses himself and near misses with the so-called royal family of England with bombs in different palaces and bunkers and so forth. And all very interesting. And there's also part of it is not just the impossibility, as he would see it, ultimately of a successful land attack, but also, and this I do believe will become more prominent. You can see it's rising up. He gives some attention to it even in Volume 1, is also the industrial focus, maybe the more materialistic focus that Churchill and the Americans soon to come will have when it comes to fighting the war. You will just outproduce the German tanks. You will just produce more airplanes, more guns, more armaments. It's very much a materialistic and logistics battle. Whereas the Germans, and certainly the policy and shall we say the mythology of the National Socialists were much more into the idea of I don't know the German expression, but Elan, to use that expression from the First World War, spirit. Like the Germans really thought, almost magically, as Carol Quigley points out in Tragedy and Coke, they almost had a magical understanding. If they could just will victory, but no obstacle would stop them, no matter how grave, no matter to the bitter end, as I've reviewed, for instance, the book on the Battle of Berlin, too many B's, the Battle of Berlin. And if you read that text, that's the name of the earlier book I read and reviewed here on these channels. You see, where is this fanaticism of the Germans coming when it seems, naturally speaking, hopeless? Well, it's coming from a magical belief of just willing victory from the darkest, most Ragnarok scenarios, most Wagnerian scenarios you can imagine. Churchill doesn't have that. He's a Western European Enlightenment creature, and he takes great solace in just mathematically how Britain, especially with American aid, and there's a whole treatment of Lend-Lease here going on, will eventually just outproduce the Germans. If the British can take the Battle of Britain on the cheek, they can take this air war on the Luftwaffe on the cheek and on the chin. And if they can just hold up in this most trying summer and autumn of 1940, they will outpace the Germans. That's something that Churchill takes great confidence in throughout. Then the last stretch of the book, you can see now by the late part of 1940, which is where the book knocks off, that the British have caught their breath, so to speak. The worst of the Battle of Britain is behind them. And what remains now is to prepare for operations, especially in the colonies. So that was something that I was also very unaware of, as the Second World War as regards Sudan and other British holdings, Egypt, of course, the Suez, and how, all these machinations around the Suez are, of course, tied up with Gibraltar and the British interest there. So those are almost the same concern, and a lot of reinforcing of Egypt, especially as the Italians are moving across from Libya and so forth, and a lot of chess moves, let's say, in the Mediterranean, navally speaking. So there's a lot going on there. Once again, I appreciate there's not really actually much attention at all given to Hitler. There was much more personally given to that man in the first volume. I should think we'll revisit himself as well in the next. But there was very little given to Adolf Hitler in this. But once again, Mussolini and Franco figure. And Churchill does not have much use for Franco on the grounds that he's staying neutral. I think Churchill finds something off-putting about that, as he would with Eamon de Valera in Ireland. And forgive me, I do not know the Portuguese leader, but I do believe the Portuguese were neutral in the Second War. At this point, Churchill has no time of day for them. Only the Vichy and the Norwegians, the Quislingites, if you like, only they come out even more opprobrious in Churchill's writing. Those who are neutral, are just a click above what Churchill would see as pansies that flaked out to the Germans and cut a deal. But Mussolini is not presented, and this is getting back to my point, and this is what I appreciated in Volume 1. Mussolini is not presented as a cartoon character any more than Hitler is in Churchill's writings, and I think that is something I appreciate. Finally, you can see a growing interest in Churchill's prose of the Germans for the Soviet Union, right? And that, of course, is what takes off a lot of the pressure and ultimately causes Hitler to shelve Sea Lion and to put on hold the Battle of Britain, air attacks, is the need for all the attention of Germany to attack the Soviet Union, which is possibly the worst decision that the German High Command made, so-called Operation Barbarossa. But you can see that there is shifting concern and shifting resources, quite literally, following that when it comes to this hour of the Second World War. So, as I say, the book has great pacing. In terms of, it's almost identically the same length as Volume 1, and the same as the case for the remaining 3 volumes. And you can see it's just the pacing with Part 1, Part 2, Part 1, Part 2, and so forth is very deliberate there. And at no point does it seem artificial nor dragged out. So that's just a testament to Churchill's writing style. And we'll see this continue as I read more and more of him. I want to read more and more of him, which is a great testament to him. I don't know if I'll dive into his treatment of Marlborough. All my Holocaust reading still remains. So that's a big shelf at the library, and I've only made so much progress in it. And I will not be making much progress if I keep getting waylaid. But I am also interested, probably more so than Marlborough, in Churchill's treatment of the English language. He wrote a whole history on the English-speaking peoples, which was kind of a intellectual fad amongst what we would call globalists here. I think we can say Churchill and Roosevelt and so forth were kind of the early versions of what we would call globalists nowadays. But that's an interesting topic. And you can see for a man who writes on the English-speaking peoples, he has a great grasp of the English language without ever being verbose or without ever going over one's head. So, very, very much a testament to the man's writing ability. All right. So there you go. There is your finest hour. I did promise you some prose from Churchill, didn't I? So here we go. These are the final 2 paragraphs of this most famous speech. I think the most famous speech of Churchill's. I would only, off the top of my head, I would only say that perhaps the Iron Curtain speech, given in West Virginia in 1946, might be more well known. You could argue it at least, but this is from the finest hour speech amidst the impending collapse of France. Here we go. Last 2 paragraphs. We do not yet know what will happen in France, or whether the French resistance will be prolonged, both in France and in the French Empire overseas. The French government will be throwing away great opportunities and casting adrift their future if they do not continue the war in accordance with their treaty obligations, from which we have not felt able to release them. The House will have read the historic declaration in which, at the desire of many Frenchmen, and out of our own hearts, we have proclaimed our willingness, at the darkest hour in French history, to conclude a union of common citizenship in this struggle. However matters may go in France, or with the French government, or other French governments, we in this island and in the British Empire will never lose our sense of comradeship with the French people. If we are now called upon to endure what they have been suffering, we shall emulate their courage. And if final victory rewards our toils, they shall share the gains, aye, and freedom shall be restored to all. We abate nothing of our just demands. Not one jot or tittle do we recede. Czechs, Poles, Norwegians, Dutch, Belgians have joined their causes to our own, and these shall be restored. What General Wagrand called the Battle of France is over. I expect that the Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. Upon it depends our own British life and the long continuity of our institutions and empire. The whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island, or lose the war, if we can stand up to him. All Europe may be free, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we have known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that, if the British Empire and this Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. Tu autem Domine misere nobis, Deo gratias. Thus is Churchill's concluding paragraphs from their finest hour of speech. So there we go. Volume 2 of his World War II series, Get Reading. And then when you're done reading, you can head over to Apocatastasis' website and enroll in all of our courses, including on 20th century history. There's so much on this site, and there's so much waiting for you at Apocatastasis. With that being said, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you soon for the next review. Bye-bye.